The winter storm had been roaring across the northern mountains for 3 days without stopping, turning the world into endless white. Snow fell so heavily that even the tall stone cliffs looked soft, and the valley below had become a silent, pale desert. Nothing moved there anymore. No birds crossed the sky. No animals wandered the frozen ground. Only the sound of the wind howling through sharp rocks remained alive. In that lonely valley lived the Dragon Pack, a once bright and powerful family who used to fill the sky with shining wings and warm firelight. Their home had always been strong, always full of life, always echoing with the happy squeaks and chirps of young hatchlings learning how to fly. But those sounds had died months ago. The nests, which once glowed with soft warmth, now sat cold inside their mountain cave. The dragons rarely spoke, and even the biggest among them walked slowly, as if the weight of their hearts kept their wings from rising. They were mourning. Every single one of them. Erana, the silver-horned matriarch and strongest dragon of the pack, lay on a high ledge at the entrance of the cave. Her scales used to shine like polished metal, but now they had lost most of their glow. She watched the storm without blinking. Snow collected around her claws, but she didn't bother to shake it off. Her thoughts stayed on the small nests behind her, 7 of them each carved with care into the stone wall. The sickness that took their hatchlings still felt like a wound that had not healed. Other dragons rested quietly around her. Some slept. Some simply stared at the falling snow. A few hissed low, soft sounds of sadness as they remembered the tiny creatures they'd lost. No one expected anything new. The mountains had become a place of grief, and grief made everything still. But on that day, something unusual moved beyond the storm's veil. Erana's eyes sharpened. At first she thought she imagined it a dark shape among the endless white, but the movement continued, slow and unsteady. She stood, her large wings stirring the air. The other dragons raised their heads in surprise, confused by the sudden shift in her energy. Something was approaching their valley. 3 younger dragons climbed to the ledge beside her, bracing themselves as the storm blew stronger. Their tails flicked nervously. Dragons did not often get visitors in winter, and anyone entering that region of the mountains usually did not survive long. Still, the shape kept coming. When it finally reached closer, the dragons tensed in shock. It was a human. He struggled through the snow, hunched over against the wind. His clothes were thick but frozen stiff. A strange device strapped to his back glowed with a faint blue light, flickering weakly as if fighting the cold. His boots sank deep into the snow with every step. A few times he stumbled, nearly falling to his knees, but somehow he kept pushing forward. The younger dragons growled low in warning, their breaths puffing out clouds of warm air. Erana raised a wing sharply, signaling them to stay silent. She watched the human carefully. He did not look dangerous. He looked tired, almost completely worn out. The human finally reached the edge of the valley and paused. He saw the dragons watching him. Even though the wind pushed against him, he forced himself to stand a little straighter. Slowly, he raised his hands to show he was not hiding any weapon. Erana unfurled her wings and dropped from the ledge in a smooth but heavy glide. Snow kicked up when she landed only a few meters away from the human. Her size alone should have been terrifying. She was larger than 3 horses standing side by side, but the human did not run. His breath shook from cold, not fear. She lowered her head until her eyes met his. The human's brown eyes looked exhausted, but honest. He tried to speak, but the cold made his words weak. Erana leaned closer, letting her ear frills pick up the soft sound. "My name is Rowan," he said with effort. "I mean no harm. I'm only passing through." Erana did not reply with words at first, only with a deep rumble that vibrated through the snow. The human stepped back slightly, but did not fall or raise his hands in defense. Instead, he waited. Rowan breathed heavily, frost forming around his lips, and tried again. "I came for minerals. A rare type. Needed for research. I didn't know dragons lived here." The younger dragons landed behind Erana, forming a semicircle. Their eyes glowed bright, full of suspicion. Rowan noticed them, but didn't look away from Erana. Something in his calmness surprised her. Most humans screamed at the sight of dragons, but this one stood still, even though he was clearly freezing. Before she could decide whether to order him away, Rowan's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees, gasping as his body finally lost its strength. The device on his back let out a weak beep, his hands sank into the snow, and his breath turned shallow. The dragons exchanged quick, uncertain looks. They didn't know what to do. Their grief had closed their hearts for months. Helping another creature felt strange, almost impossible. Why should they save him? He was a stranger, a human who walked into their territory by mistake. But Erana remembered the nests behind her. She remembered tiny claws clutching at her scales, little wings fluttering as they tried to fly. Rowan's weak, trembling form reminded her of the hatchlings she could not save. Something inside her chest stirred a protective instinct she thought she had lost forever. Without thinking, she moved her wing over Rowan, blocking the falling snow. Warm air from her chest drifted down over him, and the human shivered as the sudden heat kept him from collapsing into unconsciousness. The younger dragons gasped softly. Erana rarely extended kindness to strangers, but she stayed exactly where she was, shielding Rowan from the freezing storm. The human lifted his head slightly. He saw her wing above him and whispered, "Thank you." Erana didn't reply, but her eyes softened a little. His voice was weak, but there was no trick in it. No hidden fear or anger. Only gratitude. Two dragons nudged Rowan upright carefully, and Erana signaled them to bring him to the cave. The human could barely walk, so the dragons helped him by creating a wall of warm bodies around him, guiding him through the snowstorm. Snow melted beneath their steps, leaving a faint trail of steam. Inside the cave, the air changed. It was warm, glowing faintly from crystals set into the walls. Rowan blinked at the sight of the large stone nests lining one side of the cave. Some still held broken crystal shells. Others were cleaned but empty. He didn't understand the meaning yet, but he could feel the sadness in the air like a heavy blanket. Erana settled near him while he removed the icy gloves from his hands. His fingers were stiff, red, and shaking. He spoke quietly, almost whispering, as if afraid a loud voice might break some hidden silence in the cave. "I didn't expect anyone else here." Erana gave a deep rumble again, this time softer. Rowan didn't fully understand the sound, but somehow he sensed it wasn't a threat. The younger dragons watched him from a distance, their wings folded tight. They kept their eyes on the strange device strapped to Rowan's back. The glowing blue light made them uneasy. Rowan noticed their concern and unstrapped it slowly, placing it gently on the ground. "It's just a field analyzer," he explained. "It studies air and minerals. It won't harm anyone." The dragons didn't reply, but their tense posture eased slightly. Rowan rubbed his cold arms. "I'm sorry for entering your valley. I was trying to cross the mountains before the storm worsened. I didn't want trouble." Erana lowered her head near him. Her golden eyes reflected the blue glow of his device. Rowan felt her warm breath touch his face, chasing away the last of the freezing air trapped under his clothes. He realized she wasn't just examining him anymore, she was studying him, trying to understand who he was and why he came. Her grief had made her slow to trust, but not blind to truth. He didn't know what dragons expected from him, so he simply bowed his head slightly and said, "Thank you for saving me." Erana closed her eyes for a brief moment. For the first time in many moons, she felt something other than sorrow. She didn't know if this human came with hope or danger, but she sensed his sincerity, and she sensed that fate had brought him there for a reason. While the storm raged outside, Rowan rested near the warm crystal walls, unaware that his arrival would change everything the dragons believed about humans, and everything they believed about their own future. The storm outside did not calm for 2 more days. During that time, Rowan stayed inside the dragon's cave, recovering slowly while trying not to disturb the silent grieving pack around him. The warm crystals set into the walls kept him from freezing, but even their soft glow felt dim, as if the sadness of the dragons had drained some of their light. Rowan could feel the atmosphere of loss with every breath he took. Even though the cave was warm, the air held a heaviness that pressed on the heart. The dragons rarely spoke, and when they did, their voices rumbled with quiet sorrow. Rowan spent most of his time observing them from a respectful distance. He did not want to intrude, but he also wanted to understand them, especially Erana, the silver-horned matriarch who had protected him from the storm. She stayed the closest to him, watching over him whenever he shivered or coughed from the fading cold. Her large wings curled slightly toward him, as if shielding him from any sudden danger. But Rowan felt she was protecting him from more than just physical threats. He felt as if she were guarding him from the same sadness that clung to the cave. One morning, when the storm finally showed signs of softening outside, Rowan decided it was time to speak to Erana about why he had come to the mountains. He approached her slowly, placing his hands gently on the straps of the field analyzer he carried. Erana lifted her head, her golden eyes reflecting the faint blue light of his device. Rowan bowed slightly to show respect before he spoke. "I didn't lie when I said I came for minerals," he said softly. "But there is more to the story." Quote, the younger dragons around them shifted their wings in curiosity. Erana remained still, listening with focus. Rowan knelt and placed the field analyzer on the ground. Its screen flickered weakly at first, then brightened as it warmed from the cave's heat. He looked at the dragons with a steady expression, knowing the truth mattered. "I'm a field researcher," he explained. "I study strange illnesses that appear in cold environments. A sickness has been spreading on distant worlds. It affects eggs, young creatures, small lives that cannot protect themselves." At those words, the dragons' breaths deepened. A few growled softly, not in anger at Rowan, but in painful memory. Erana's tail curled tightly against the stone floor. Rowan saw the reaction and lowered his voice even more. "I didn't know your pack had suffered the same kind of loss," he continued. "But when I arrived here, I felt it. I saw the empty nests." Erana exhaled slowly, a long, warm breath that stirred the dust around Rowan's boots. She moved closer, until her huge shadow covered him. For the first time, she spoke directly to him in a way he could understand, not in human language, but in soft, vibrating sounds and slow, meaningful gestures. Rowan had studied dragon communication during his training, so he focused carefully, reading the emotion in her movements. Erana explained that months ago, something strange had swept through the valley. The eggs and hatchlings had grown weak, their glowing scales fading until their tiny bodies could no longer hold warmth. The pack's healers tried everything, but nothing stopped the sickness. One by one, the young dragons fell silent. When Erana finished speaking, her wings drooped. Rowan felt the weight of her grief settle into his chest. He wished he could say something comforting, but he knew the best comfort he could offer was action. "I might be able to help," he said firmly, surprising even himself with the strength of his voice. "I've seen similar sickness before. If I can collect enough samples from your valley, my analyzer might find the cause." The dragons exchanged glances. Their eyes brightened slightly, though they tried not to show too much hope at once. Hope was painful when it had been lost before. Erana stepped forward again and touched the tip of her snout to Rowan's shoulder. It was a gesture of trust, rare and powerful. Rowan placed his hand gently on her warm scales. "We will take you," she said through a low rumble that he understood clearly. With that, the dragons prepared to guide him outside. Rowan strapped the analyzer securely to his back, tightened his thick winter coat, and followed them to the cave entrance. When the cold wind hit him again, it felt much sharper than before, but the dragons formed a protective wall around him as they stepped out into the snow. The storm had weakened, leaving behind deep white drifts and a sky heavy with gray clouds. The dragons moved easily across the snow, their large bodies clearing a path for Rowan. Erana walked at his side, close enough that her warm breath brushed his cheek occasionally. Rowan felt safer with her nearby, though he knew danger still waited somewhere in the valley. As they crossed the open ground, the pack led Rowan to places where the sickness had first appeared. They stopped at a frozen pool where the hatchlings once played. Rowan crouched down and chipped pieces of ice into small containers. The analyzer beeped softly as it collected the samples. Dragons watched with strict attention, their eyes following every movement of his hands. Next, they led him to the old nesting alcove built into the valley wall. Stone shelves held shattered eggshells that glimmered faintly under the snow. Rowan touched one piece gently, feeling the delicate patterns etched along its surface. Even in death, the hatchlings had carried beauty. He handled each fragment with respect, placing them carefully into sample bags. Erana pressed her head close to his, sniffing softly at the shells. Rowan looked up at her. "I'll find out what happened," he promised quietly. She blinked in a slow, approving gesture. After visiting every part of the valley, Rowan returned to the cave with the dragons. The analyzer's data storage was nearly full, and he needed time to study everything. The dragons gathered around him in a wide circle as he unpacked the samples and started scanning them one by one. Hours passed. The only sounds in the cave were the faint humming of the analyzer and the steady breathing of the dragons. Rowan tapped buttons, read graphs, and compared results. His eyes narrowed as he noticed something strange. A foreign pattern in the samples. Something that didn't belong in the natural environment of the valley. Erana lifted her head and moved close when she sensed his change in posture. "What did you find?" Her low voice seemed to ask through her deep rumble. Rowan inhaled slowly. "Something carried the sickness here," he said. "It didn't start in the valley. Something brought it." The dragons became tense, growling softly to each other. Erana let out a quick, sharp breath, her wings twitching. Rowan raised his hands calmly. "It wasn't another dragon," he clarified quickly. "The pattern matches a creature I've seen before. A small frost feeder. The kind that travels across mountain ranges in search of warm places. They're harmless to adult dragons, but very dangerous to eggs." Erana growled softly, not anger at Rowan, but frustration that the sickness had entered their home in such a quiet, sneaky way. Rowan continued gently. "The good news is, if I can track the exact mineral balance the creature left behind, I can design a protection layer for future eggs. Something that blocks the infection before it reaches them." The dragon's eyes widened. Even in their grief, a flicker of hope grew. Rowan looked around at all of them. "I can help you protect your next generation. But I will need more samples from beyond the valley. From a place hotter than this. Maybe volcanic." Erana straightened, spreading her wings slowly. She understood immediately. There was a place like that, the volcanic borderlands, a dangerous region filled with unstable stone bridges and steam vents. The dragons rarely traveled there, but they knew its location well. She leaned close to Rowan again, lowering her head until he could touch her scales. He placed a hand gently between her horns, thanking her without words. Erana let out a deep rumble of agreement. The meaning was clear. He would not go alone. The dragons would guide him. For the first time since Rowan arrived, the pack felt the warmth of purpose returning to their hearts. They no longer moved like creatures drowning in grief. They straightened. They breathed deeper. They watched Rowan not with suspicion, but with belief. Something in the mountains had finally shifted. A human had entered their pain and offered them a path out of it. And Erana, watching him prepare his gear for the next journey, felt something she never expected to feel again. Hope. When Rowan woke the next morning, the cave felt different. The heavy sadness that had once filled the air was lighter now, replaced by a quiet determination that pulsed through the dragons. They moved with stronger steps and breathed with deeper lungs. Even the crystals on the walls glowed brighter, as if reacting to the renewed energy of the pack. Rowan rubbed his tired eyes and sat up slowly, surprised at how awake the dragons seemed compared to the day before. Erana stood at the mouth of the cave, watching the sky with her wings half spread. Her scales reflected the early gray light. And Rowan noticed something he hadn't seen before. A faint shimmer. A glow slowly returning to her once bright body. When she looked back at him, her eyes were sharper, clearer, filled with purpose instead of sorrow. "You are ready," she said through a deep rumble he understood without needing words. Rowan nodded. His field analyzer hummed softly, its screen displaying the list of minerals he needed to collect from the volcanic borderlands. He tightened the strap on his pack, checked the sample containers twice, and then walked toward Erana. The younger dragons gathered behind her, eager but controlled, waiting for their matriarch's signal. Rowan placed a hand on Erana's front leg to steady himself and climbed carefully onto her back. Her warm scales pressed through his gloves, and for a moment, he felt like he was touching a living furnace. He settled between the ridges near the base of her neck, gripping them for balance. Erana raised her wings, and the wind rushing into the cave lifted Rowan's hair. With one mighty push, she leapt into the air. The other dragons followed, their wings spreading in unison. Snow flew in swirling trails beneath them as they rose above the valley. Rowan felt the cold air sting his cheeks, but Erana angled her wings to shield him from the harshest gusts. The pack soared higher, rising above the gray clouds until the sun broke through and bathed them in golden light. From above, the valley looked peaceful, soft, white, quiet. But Rowan knew the truth beneath that beauty, and so did the dragons. That was why they flew with fierce purpose toward the volcanic borderlands far to the south. Hours passed as they traveled across the snowy mountains. Rowan watched the world change beneath them. White valleys gave way to dark, rocky cliffs, and freezing winds grew warmer as they approached the volcanic region. Smoke rose from distant cracks in the ground, forming thin spirals that drifted lazily into the sky. The heat shimmered in strange waves, making the air quiver like liquid. Erana slowed her flight as they neared the borderlands, circling once to find a safe place to land. The ground below was uneven and dangerous. Large patches of black stone glowed faintly from the heat building underneath. If someone stepped in the wrong spot, the ground could burst open with boiling steam. Finally, Erana found a stable ledge. She landed carefully, folding her wings as Rowan slid down her shoulder with caution. The younger dragons landed nearby, sniffing the hot air and scraping the rocky ground with their claws. Rowan adjusted his mask to filter the sulfur in the air and prepared the analyzer. It beeped as soon as it detected the mineral-rich environment. He knelt and brushed away the dust, revealing glimmering orange and gold stones embedded deep into the ground. These were exactly what he needed. He chipped pieces of the glowing rocks into his containers while the dragons kept watch. Every few moments, Rowan paused to wipe the sweat, stinging his eyes. The heat here was intense, especially after days in the cold. A loud crack broke through the silence. Rowan startled and jumped back as steam burst from a nearby fissure. Erana's wings flared instantly. She stepped protectively in front of him, her claws gripping the trembling stone. The younger dragons hissed with warning, forming a protective circle. Rowan steadied his breathing. "I'm okay," he said quietly. Erana's eyes softened, but she did not step away until the steam died down. Rowan continued collecting samples, moving carefully across the ground. He filled every container with the mineral needed to create a protective layer. He scanned each sample twice to ensure accuracy. Sweat ran down his forehead. The dragons remained close, lowering their heads to stay alert for sudden danger. Their teamwork made Rowan feel strangely safe in a place where he would have never survived alone. When he finished gathering everything, Rowan stood and stepped back toward Erana. His clothes were hot to the touch, and he felt dizzy from the heat, but the smile on his face showed relief. "I have enough," he said. "This should be everything we need." Erana lowered her head so he could climb onto her back again. Rowan held tight as the dragons beat their wings and took off, leaving the burning borderlands behind. The flight back felt different. The cold wind felt refreshing instead of painful, and the dragons flew with excitement, their wings slicing through the air with strength. As they returned to the valley, the dragons roared loud, powerful, hopeful roars that echoed across the mountains. Rowan shivered at the sound, not from fear, but from the feeling that he was witnessing a turning point in their lives. Inside the cave, Rowan set to work immediately. He heated the volcanic minerals over a controlled flame, melting them into liquid that cooled into a protective paste. The dragons gathered around him, watching with focused eyes. The smell of warm minerals filled the cave as the mixture thickened into a smooth substance that shimmered gold. Rowan dipped a claw-sized shell fragment into the mixture. It coated the shell evenly, forming a beautiful protective layer that hardened within seconds. "It works," Rowan whispered in awe. Erana leaned closer, examining the coated shell. Her eyes widened with hope that shook her entire body. She looked at Rowan, and for a moment her expression carried more emotion than her deep rumbles could ever express. Rowan wasn't finished yet. He tested the mixture against frozen air, extreme heat, and even simulated traces of the sickness. The protective layer resisted all of it. When he placed tiny droplets of infected crystal dust on the coated shell, the sickness turned harmless instantly. The cave fell silent. Then Erana exhaled sharply, a burst of hot air filled with pride and relief. Rowan stepped back from his tools, wiping sweat and dust from his forehead. "This will protect your future eggs," he said. "No sickness will harm them again." The dragons moved around him, their tails swaying and wings unfolding. Their eyes gleamed with gratitude. Some made soft chirping sounds, the same gentle sounds they once used for their hatchlings. Rowan's throat tightened as he listened. It felt like the cave itself was breathing again. Erana approached him last, lowering her head so her horns nearly touched the ground. Rowan placed both hands on her warm snout. Her breath washed over him like a comforting wave. She spoke through low vibrations that carried emotion more clearly than any words. Rowan understood all of it. "You came to us in our darkest winter. You brought warmth where there was none. You gave us hope when we thought it was gone forever. You are part of our pack now." Rowan's eyes stung as he whispered, "Thank you." Erana lifted him gently with her snout, placing him on her back again. The entire dragon pack surrounded them, forming a protective circle. For the first time since he arrived in the mountains, Rowan did not feel like an outsider. He felt welcomed. He felt trusted. He felt the weight of their belief resting proudly on his shoulders. Outside the cave, the storm clouds finally opened, revealing a sky painted with soft sunlight. Snow sparkled like diamonds across the valley floor. The dragons stepped out together, with Rowan riding high on Erana's back. Their wings opened, their roars rose, and for the first time in many long months, the valley echoed not with grief, but with life. Rowan looked at the dragons surrounding him, their scales glowing brighter than they had in a long time. He smiled, knowing the future of the pack was safe. The human who appeared in the snow had not only survived the mountains, he had helped the dragons reclaim their hope, their strength, and their future, and they would remember him for generations.